So have you ever run into the problem of having 5 to 8 grams left in your bag of coffee? You know, what do you do with this? And if you have some high-end stuff, what do you do with the high-end stuff? You could try to do a really tiny pour over and a small dripper, but I have a better solution. So I have about 7 grams of this Astrid Medina from SEY, which is just such an awesome Colombian coffee. And I could make a pour over with this. It would be fine, but I think what's more interesting is to push extraction to the highest you can possibly go. And what better way to do that than with our good friend, the Bripe. So we're just gonna go and Bripe some Astrid Medina, and we'll probably Bripe some Manhattan as well, because we can do that. What a good way to send off this beautiful coffee. So for those of you who don't know, this is the Bripe. It's a immersion brewer of some sort. I want to kind of show you how I've been extracting ultra light roasted coffee on a Bripe. The nicest thing about the Bripe is that, in my opinion, it is one of the most interesting ways to brew coffee. The biggest thing with actually pushing extractions on a Bripe and extracting the most out of your Bripe is grinding probably around espresso grind size. You have to grind very, very fine. This does mean that if you do sip through the actual brew pipe, it's gonna be gritty, and you know, you get more body there, right? You're literally getting coffee grounds in every sip, perceivable texture, you know? That is the best way to hit higher extractions with a Bripe, and you can run some lighter roast coffees through here. So I'm gonna be using a combination of an electric kettle as well as the quad jet torch. What you wanna do is you want to pour in your boiling water, and you'll find that your temperature is going to drop, and then you use the power of the quad jet torch and you will modulate, you'll like throttle and up and down like you're coffee roasting, right? Throttle that temperature and you try to maintain around 200 degrees Fahrenheit here. I think maintaining around that 200 is pretty solid actually for extracting some of these light roasts. If you're brewing something dark, go to a lower temperature. Go too high on the temperature, you kind of bring in some sort of burnt taste. So we want to avoid that in our Bripe, which is why we use a lower temperature. I'd say even 195 would work as well. But it's really that maintaining the temperature and modulating the heat here and using that really fine grind size results in the most optimal Bripe. Ratios are also worth mentioning. I actually really like using about 5 grams and filling up to about 35 to 40 grams of water. So I'm in that, I would say, 1 to 7, 1 to 8 ratio. You are going to get pretty thick body because of the ratio, but also because you're going to get grounds in your brew. But these longer ratios have allowed me to kind of actually get acidity in the brew aside from just coffee grit, which is hilarious. But let me go ahead and brew some. We'll probably measure something as well just for memes, but we're going to do the rest of this SEY Astrid Medina. I'm going to send it off. It's gonna be awesome. We're gonna be using the Titus Nautilus with the SSP brew burrs in it, which will give us that oomph that we need. We're grinding at about espresso fine, which is awesome. And what's cool about the Nautilus is that I can actually turn the grinder on without doing anything because there's a foot pedal. And there we go, there's our 5 grams, it's all gone. I like to put my Bripe on the stand, and then I also put it into here. And what I've been finding is if you are around that 200 degree mark, you're gonna really see the boiling occur. You're gonna see your grounds agitate, which means you're pushing higher extractions, maybe. What I will say is that this metal filter does not too good of a job for espresso fine grinding. There are just too many of those fines that will actually go through into your brew and give you perceivable body, we could say. Basically, as you're actually heating this up, you'll notice that the water is going to start boiling. The Bripe, your Bripe is going to get really, really hot. And as well as sometimes the coffee will expand up. But with some of these lighter roast coffees, it's not too big of a deal. But you do want to make sure of your initial starting dose as well as how much water you're actually using so that when you're heating this, your brew doesn't spill over and you burn yourself or something like that. We can put that in there and drop the stand. So can do this, and then I like to give this a slight little bump to help shake it down there. And then I'm just trying to get the bed of grounds on the inside as level as possible. So my bed of grounds is about just pretty even. It's slightly level, not as tall as that actual pole on the inside of where the stand goes into there. However, it's going to give us plenty of room to add our boiling water, and we're going to put in about 35 grams so we can get a 1:7 ratio. Instead of holding this all the way down, you just modulate. So that's how I've gotten the most longevity out of my Bripe flame, and I don't have to recharge it as much. So you'll just kind of modulate it back and forth like that, and it seems to work the best. Pour up to 35. And I could be a nerd about it and try to actually pour, but I think just filling it is going to be good. All right, so 36 grams, a little higher. Our temperature inside the Bripe is about 180. What we're going to do is we're just going to modulate our temperature here. It's going to be hard to hold this up for the camera as well, but I'm going to keep this to about 200. Once I hit 200, I'm going to hold it there for a few seconds. So it's starting to really boil. I hit 200. Now I'm going to let off a little. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of maintain that temperature. All right. So if we go above 200, it does spurt out a little like that, and there's coffee on the ground. I'm going to just let this sit now. If you do add more quad-jet fuel, your temperature is going to go up and coffee is going to kind of spurt everywhere. I like to just hit 200, and once it hits 200, I let off the gas, and then I'm going to take this. So I'm at 200 right now, and I'm just going to give this a slight stir here. Actually, smelling this, smells pretty good. I do think that my temperature on this was slightly too high. I held it at 200 for a little bit too long, so I feel like I'm getting a slight burnt smell to it, but we'll have to taste it. It might also just be literally the Bripe is smelling like it's burnt, which I've had that as well. It is going to take a few minutes for this to cool down. I like to cool it down to about 160 or 140 to 160 Fahrenheit before I sip it. I think right now it's way too hot. Alternatively, you can also just pour it into a cup and just bypass the filter entirely, and you're going to get a pretty gritty cup, but we'll kind of wait for this to cool down. So, actually, wow. Blowing into it and now smelling some of the aromas, because we've agitated the grounds from the kind of the level. It's kind of like a cupping where your crust will stay at the top and you could actually scoop it off. Now that we've kind of re-agitated the grounds on the inside, the aromas I'm getting off of this are quite fantastic. Wow, just smelling that, that's hilarious. Definitely a lot different than a cupping of some sort, but I guess you could argue that the Bripe has a directed aroma to your face. But wow, smells really sweet. Definitely, this is what I got from this Astrid coffee when I originally brewed it. But it was so much fun to brew this coffee. I loved it so much. But we're at about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to let this cool a little bit more. All right, so it is cooled down to about 140 degrees, which means that we probably can start enjoying it. It is still a little bit on the hotter side, but it smells so sweet. Wow, that's really good. So it is gritty. I sipped it fast, so I got some aeration in it. I definitely am getting this like really sweet, acidic cherry. It's like a red fruit, a cherry of some sort. The finish on it, I want to say cacao, I want to say chocolate, but I think it's because I'm literally tasting coffee grounds. But this is not bad. So we're just gonna do some sus measurements right now. I can cool this down, but I'm just gonna use this little shroom thing to cool it down a little, and we'll wait a few more seconds for our sample to fully cool down, and then we'll hit that read button. It's probably gonna be pretty high. I'm actually just gonna put the rest of this into this cup, and we already see some grounds, just so you guys can get a little bit of a visual on it. But if you see here, I'm going to try to do this, is that it is a pretty visually thick brew, and there we go. There are all of our grounds. I bet you if we took our measurement, if we like gave it a swirl and we did our measurement there, we would get a way higher TDS reading. But I'm just going to read it now. 3.43%, you know, is that believable? Probably. So we're getting like, you know, 3.29% out of here. 3.4%. The sample here is going to be much cooler because we put it in earlier, as well as we used the magic here. You know, around that like 3 to 3.4% TDS, which is You know, believable because Bripe brews are pretty thick. So if we actually look at that again, like look at how thick that is. You know, you can visually see how much solids there are, and they're mostly grounds, but it smells just so sweet, which is crazy to me. I mean, it's not crazy to me, it's a Bripe, and it's great coffee, but wow, really great acidity still. Very gritty, very gritty. Finish on it is pretty chocolatey. It definitely is been muddied because of the amount of grounds in here, and but I am getting perceivable texture. I can feel the grounds on my tongue. I can feel the microfines. I can feel actual grounds and fines as well. Pretty good, considering that this was 5 grams of coffee, and I feel like it is well extracted, at least from my taste. Are these measurements going to be the most accurate? Absolutely not. But the point is that you can do some mean stuff and actually brew ultra light coffee with your Bripe. And it's such a fantastic way to send off the rest of your bag, whatever tiny amount of coffee you have. All right, it's time to brew some Letty. I poured out the rest of my Astrid into another cup, and as we see, we got that beautiful sludge at the bottom. I guess if you were sipping really fast, you could get the liquids up here, and that's what I was doing. I was getting minimal grounds in my drink, but really great acidity. Definitely an immersion style of brew, but it was really popping because of the finer grind and also this grinder, as well as the bubbling that I think the agitation gives us more extraction, more flavors. I don't know anything anymore about coffee. This is what we've been reduced to now. Honestly, that brew is not bad. I haven't actually ever run natural process or like weird process coffees here. I feel like this could potentially be very muddy. We're just going to maintain the same exact grind size as before. But if you have never had Manhattan coffees or any of these processed coffees, especially from a producer like Diego Bermudez, it's very worthwhile trying. They're some of the most interesting coffees around because they don't really taste like coffee to me, or traditional views of coffee. Super just craziness occurs. But anyway, let's go ahead and prep this Bripe as well. This coffee, for those of you who got the Letty Bermudez, it's like candied peach to me. Peach rings. Peach rings is actually exactly how this smells. And I'm curious if we'll get any peach rings in the Bripe. Okay, we're going to pour up to 35 grams. So I put 5 grams in, 35 grams. The temperature here is around 180. Make sure our Bripe torch is up. And we're going to try to hit 200 degrees. I think going a little bit slower for this one is okay, like just gradually going on the gas like this. And we're going to hit that 200 once we hit there. And also you can change the distance here as well. But I think once you hit 200, just hold it around 200 for a few seconds. That's really when things are going to start boiling. We're going to get that crazy agitation. As you see there, I went a few degrees above 200 there. I'm going to try to just maintain that a little here. And now I am going to let that go down. So I'm probably doing the bumping of the heat or maintaining around that 200 degrees Fahrenheit for about, I would say, like 5 to 10 seconds. And once I just am around that constantly, it is going to be a little bit difficult to modulate depending on how good you are at briping. You hit there, and we're going to just let it cool down. And we're just going to let the grounds immerse. It's very similar to a cupping, essentially. And I think it does benefit to blow air into the grounds and just kind of agitate things around, especially once you see a crust form at the top. It's just, you know, we could scrape it off with like some tiny little espresso spoons and do a mini cupping, but I think it's much more fun to just get everything incorporated back in and see what it tastes like, even though you're not supposed to. But there are no rules when you're briping. So, wow, smelling this actually, as at around 200 Fahrenheit, we've dropped a little bit below 200. This coffee smells like peaches. Like that is amazing. And I'm not really agitating or anything. I'm seeing that a crust is getting formed. You can kind of just follow pretty standard cupping temperatures if you really wanted to. That really was what kind of this was like, is I wanted to just smell it hot, smell it when I blew some air into it, like it kind of was like skimming there, but it's just really fun. This is so fun, and it's a great way to use a very low amount of coffee to experience a coffee, although I don't know if you should really do this. I definitely see that crust form as the temperature cools down, like around that 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and what we'll do is we'll kind of just blow into it, and we'll kind of smell and get the aromas. That's part of the Briping experience, you know? We could say that it's a jank way of doing a cupping, but you actually are getting kind of the presentation of coffee all throughout, and it's pretty fun. It's much more fun, at least to me, to bripe than to cup. Cupping's so serious, just bripe it. So I'm about 170 now, and a crust has clearly formed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blow into this to help agitate and introduce some air in there, and basically we're going to break up that crust and get those beautiful aromas. Wow, it is peach rings, candied peach, just that's crazy. This is a very fantastic coffee, and it feels so interesting to be presented it this way of, I just like, usually I'm trying so hard and you're trying to cup and everything, but we're able to do a mini cupping essentially here, but we're getting a great presentation of what the coffee can be through a process like this. Is it consistent? Absolutely not, but it's super fun. So as you see there, I broke up the crust by blowing the air in there, and you just get a massive amount of aroma release, very similar to skimming, breaking the crust, giving it a smell, and now we can kind of begin actually briping or slurping the coffee. Temperature is now at that 160. I also think that as you bripe, it's good to also blow into it some more, get some more agitation, get those aromas to come out, because that's also part of the briping experience, Like, you gotta get the nasal, you gotta get the mouth here. It's all good. Interesting. Okay, so I'm tasting that peach up front, then it totally goes into this chocolate note. This is interesting because I've brewed a fair amount of this, and I think the reason I'm getting that sort of chocolate note is because I'm literally eating coffee grounds. But everything before the aftertaste is actually really fantastic. I think when I do pour this into the glass here, it will be much more transparent, or we'll be able to really just taste the top layer of the grounds there, and we'll get much more of the peach. But sipping it here, and that's because the sipping part of the bripe is down here, we're going to get some grounds, we're getting some grittiness, but the initial sip is actually very, very peach. And it definitely is slightly tea-like because of the way this burst set renders things, but big body, big grittiness. We're actually getting, high TDS, right? Aromas on this are stellar. We see massive amounts of, it's very thick. It's a very high TDS. Visually looking, it's a very high TDS looking brew. But, we'll measure it just for fun. Okay, just doing some brief measurements here. 3.22% here. 3.18% here. So I think it's because we have the magic here and whatnot. But yeah, we're getting around the same extractions because we're doing very similar recipes. I don't know what else to say here, is that, yeah, this is the Bripe. It is a fairly strong brew. It's like your typical immersion brew, but it is a 1:7 ratio, pretty thick ratio. But, okay, so now that this has cooled down, the aromatics are still very peach-like because it's one of these processed coffees, but I'm getting now this really sweet peach here, and I'm only sipping the top of this brew, so I'm not getting any of those grounds in here, or not as many of those grounds. And now it's that really nice rounded peach that finishes, I would say, like, definitely this has like a very milky oolong, like milk tea type of finish. This is probably very like close to peach milk tea or something. Just very crazy when we think about coffees. As this cools down, the acidity does come out in this specific coffee. If you wanted to buy some of it, I would highly recommend it. That's hilariously good. And, I will say that immersion brew, especially this thing, like, you could just put it in that boiling water and you could just let it sit. You don't have to actually try to extract more by agitating the grounds or anything. You could just use it like a cupping device. I think it's way more fun, to be honest, to bripe than to cup. But you get a pretty great presentation of what a coffee can be like. And I think it's so fun. This is so much fun to just use that last bit of coffee in your bag. But yeah, this was for fun. The Bripe is a serious brewing tool, my friends. But yeah, that's all I wanted to show off today. Thank you so much for spending the time to watch the video. I'll see you guys around. I hope this was fun.